they tend to draw some of the scenes of the way that they would see themselves as well. So that was the Bible Project Angel of the Lord video. And it's just a nice summary that gets us to thinking a little bit about who this angel of the Lord is. So we're going to start with the first appearance of the angel of the Lord, and that's back in Genesis chapter 16. And it's interesting because it's an appearance not to, somebody who's going to be a part of the family of Abraham anymore. Okay, so the background, you remember, Hagar and, right, Sarah decided that because she wasn't having a baby, and the only way to ensure in that culture to pass the inheritance down had to be passed through males. So, and that's why Abraham says to God at one point, well, God, you promised, and am I only going to have a slave? Because the oldest servant, male servant, who is like the CEO of the corporation, of the family corporation, would take over, and he would get the inheritance. And so he says, is it a slave that's going to get my inheritance? Because that's the way it would pass. So Sarah's getting older. She figures she's past her prime, and she has a servant, Hagar, and says, Hagar, go sleep with my husband. This was old-time surrogate parenting, right? Does surrogate parenting go on today? Absolutely.
With a lot of problems.
Pardon?
With a lot of problems.
Can have a lot of problems. I remember I was teaching a Concordia evening course, and one of the questions I always ask them at the beginning, just to get to know them, is tell me something about yourself I wouldn't know except you telling me. And one of the gals said, well, I've been a surrogate mother a couple times, and I'm planning on doing it again. And we talked a little bit about it after class, not in front of everybody. But she hung around one day, and so we talked a little bit about it, and she said, you go through a whole battery of psychological tests for doing something like that, and you have an embryo implanted in your womb, and you carry it to term for another couple who for whatever reason physiologically the mother can't carry the baby. And she had done it a couple of times, and she said the biggest problem, of course, is people say, I want to do it, but then when they carry a baby for 9 months, giving that baby up is tough. You see that sometimes with people who will say, well, I don't want to abort, I want to adopt my baby, but then they get to the point where the baby's born and they say, and depending on the state, you have a certain amount of time to change your mind. In the state of Wisconsin, it was, I don't know if it still is, but it was like 6 months.
Yeah, it is, because James and Jessica went through that with their...
So then typically they would, when the baby's born, they don't give it to the adoptive parents. They have special homes that will take the baby for 6 months.
Unless they sign off.
Unless they sign off.
They sign off.
But otherwise you can't get your baby that you're going to adopt. Now, my son adopted in Texas, and there's 24 hours. The mother's got 24 hours to change her mind. And then she signs the paper, and that's it. So certainly there are people who are still doing that. They don't go through the normal sexual intercourse to have the baby. It's usually an implanted embryo into a surrogate's womb. But when you don't have that kind of technology available to you, and the problem is, of course, is that, and that's all recorded at the beginning of chapter 16. But then she runs away from Sarah. And so here's where the angel of the Lord appears. So somebody want to read verses 7 to 14?
The Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going? I am running away from my mistress Sarah, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave his name to the Lord, who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was named Bir Lahai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered.
That is one of the most moving things in Scripture, that this woman, who was probably not of the faith of Abraham and Sarah,
Right.
I'm guessing, and yet she says, this is the God that sees me.
Me.
And to me, that's just so moving, you know, coming from where she was being abused and used and abused.
Abused, yeah.
I think it's just so lovely.
It's it tells us something though about when you're living in the, you know, we think of the Abraham's family as being, you know, Abraham and Sarah and then later on Isaac, but now Hagar and Ishmael. But you have to realize that the father household in that day and age, he might have had, when you think about the number of sheep and cattle that he had, that he might have had, you know, close to 100 people he was responsible for. So it's not a small household. And you also realize that that if you're the master of the household, you're also going to introduce those people in your household to your God. And so she obviously would have, being so close to Abraham because of being Sarah's maidservant. And in verse 1 of chapter 16, it tells us she was an Egyptian maidservant, so she wasn't from the Abraham's family.
She's still Sarah. She's not even Sarah yet.
Right. That's going to come a little bit later. That's in Genesis 18, which is the next place the angel of the Lord shows up. But it's interesting that the first place the angel of the Lord shows up is in this place where somebody's being mistreated, and he stands in the gap. The major characters here are just Sarah, and this is what we want to do is look at the context. What's the context? Who are the major characters here? It's just Sarah and the angel of the Lord.
No, Hagar and the angel.
I mean Hagar, I'm sorry. Hagar and the angel of the Lord, yeah. And then you look at you look at the names. This is something we want to note is what names is this angel called? If there are any other names besides angel of the Lord. If you turn to verse 13, for instance, what does it say? She gave this name to the
Lord.
So here's what that video was talking about. Sometimes he's called the angel of the Lord, sometimes he's called the Lord. He's the angel of the Lord, and he's also Lord. She gave this name to him, and so he's called the Lord. He's also, in her response, you are the God who sees me.
And also the one who sees me.
Also the one.
And the one. And then if you look at your footnote for the name for the well, the footnote tells you that the words Bir Lahai Roy means Oh, if you don't have a study Bible, you're not gonna
Right,
see
we
it.
don't have a study Bible.
Well, beyond that, the spirit, it means the well of the living one. The well of the living one. So he's called Lord, he's called God, he's called the living one. So those are what he's called. Now what does he do? And again, now you want to look at how does he speak? So look at verse 10. What does it say?
I will increase your descendants.
Now, what's strange about that? If he's not the Lord, who is this angel who says he can increase the descendants? Okay. Yeah, so he acts like God, right? I'm the one who can control how many descendants you are, which is something that's going to show up with Abraham as well. I will so. He doesn't say the Lord will increase your descendants. He says, I will. And what does Ishmael's name means? Again, if you got a study Bible, I'm sorry, I don't have the study Bible notes here, but Ishmael means God hears. The Ale part is God, and Ishmael is hears. Which sets you up for what she says later on, you are the one who sees me, not only the one who sees me, but who hears me, because in the, you're going to give him the name Ishmael, God sees, for the Lord has heard of your misery. And he self-identifies himself with the one who hears and the one who sees her in her misery. Yep, Karen?
Why does he go into this whole thing about he will be a wild donkey of a man and everyone's gonna have their hand against him?
She may wish he never had him.
Well, that's why I'm saying this is so weird, because he's telling her you're gonna have a son, and here's his name, but he's gonna be a bad guy.
Well, what most people understand by this is that Ishmael was not, he's going to be separated from the settlement of Abraham, which he does, right? So when he says he's going to live like a wild donkey, it might be a fact that, or pointing to the fact that he's not going to have a lot of roots. You know, he's going to move from place to place. And the hostility that would be there is a hostility that's going to continue to exist between the children of Hagar and the children of Sarah. Still in evidence today because...
You want to talk about the Middle East now?
Yeah.
All of the Arab groups?
Right.
Against the Israelites?
Right.
That's what that just
That's
said.
what that is, yeah. Because the Ishmael's father of many of the Canaanites and Palestinians, we would say today. And they're still at war with the children of Sarah, the sons of Abraham, that side. Because both the Palestinians, the Muslims, many of the Muslims, that especially from the Middle East, not all Muslims are from the Middle East, but the Muslims in the Middle East count as their father Abraham as well.
So,
In most Muslim cultures, one of the highest, holiest feast days is the day when they commemorate Abraham and Isaac. It's a big story, and animals are sacrificed and everything. Not in the Jewish faith, but in the Muslim faith.
so
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, the prophet of Islam was
Muhammad?
And actually, all this started in the Middle Ages when he actually organized them, because they weren't organized people. They were contentious for sure.
Yeah.
but
And they
weren't-
still are, hence you got the Shiites and
because they were actually,
the Sunnis who don't get along with each other
yeah, but
either.
he actually solidified that whole concept with with that faith, because that was actually early Middle Ages.
And what we forget is there's a lot about the characters of the Bible in the Quran.
But
I can't cite the
they've
number of
rewritten it.
places, but for instance, Mary is mentioned, Jesus' mother is mentioned more in the Quran than she's in the Bible.
Yeah, but they rewrote
Which
it.
a lot of
for
people
sure.
don't know.
Yeah, they rewrote it, but they used a lot
But,
of.
what I'm just saying is that there's a lot of connection between what's in the Quran and what's in Christianity,
Yeah.
and it's people who work among Muslims are especially in tune with that because it provides a door for them to present the gospel if they know what's in the Quran that's also in the scriptures, because Jesus is mentioned in the
Yeah,
Quran
he's
as
just a
well.
good prophet. They don't go into.
In some places, there is a place in the Quran where it sounds like he was raised from the dead. So it's, but this is the seed of that animosity that is extended to this day between those two groups of people.
That's what happens when you force what you wish to happen.
So here, and so what are the actions of the angel? The angel gives Ishmael his name. The angel is worshipped by Hagar. And the words of the angel are this, I will increase your descendants so that they'll be too numerous to count. You are now with child and you will have a son. So there's your gender reveal. Right?
No balloons going up in the air.
No balloons going up in the air. Because at this stage, no early trimester ultrasounds, right? With a doctor saying, do you want to know or don't you want to know? Okay, so that's the very first time, and it's just interesting right away. You got this balance between somebody who's an angel of the Lord and somebody who's called the Lord, called the God, who speaks as a messenger for God, but also speaks as one who is effecting the message. Okay, so that's our first occurrence. Let's go to Genesis 18. This is a little longer one, but it's a significant visit to Abraham, promising again a blessing to him. So I'll tell you what, I'll get started if somebody wants to pick up where I stop. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed and then go on your way now that you've come to your servant." So a couple of things here. First of all, underline the places where it says Lord in this paragraph. The first time is the second word in the first paragraph there. And then look at what, if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line down, second word in is Lord. What's the difference between those two Lords? One's capital, one's not. What's the difference in your translation?
One is capital, is referring to God.
It's the holy name for God, so be Yahweh. The one that's not capital would be Adonai, which is a word that is a word of respect, but not of. So, again, a little Hebrew lesson here. Let's grab one that'll show up. So, Yahweh is the Hebrew word for God's holy name. When Moses at the burning bush, we're going to hear, says, "Who should I tell you that sent you?" God says, "Yahweh sent." It's YHWH. Depending on what vowels you put with it, it's the verb to be, means either I was, I am, or I will be. So tell him I am sent you, right? That's this name. And in modern translations, it is always with capitals. It's the way to distinguish between a couple of words that are translated Lord. The other one, which is also here, is the word Adonai. And it's a word that's more one of respect. So when Caleb comes home from basic, everything's going to be yes sir, yes ma'am.
Yes.
Because it gets drilled into them. I love it when people get out of basic because it's yes sir, yes ma'am. And it's always interesting because it's so drilled into them. When I greet them on Sunday morning, it's yes sir, thank you sir. But that's this. It's a sir. Or think Lords and Ladies of London. It's an office, it's not saying you're the Lord, but you're an earthly, authority or ruler, okay? And what the Old Testament does is uses these words sometimes interchangeably, and this is one of those times. So the first time it says, who's showing up to see Abraham? Yahweh is. Does Abraham recognize him? Not yet. He says, my Lord, sir. And part of their culture was that if somebody came to visit, you had to make room for them. Hospitality is expected, Of course you're going to stay with me. Of course I'm going to feed you. It was that kind of culture, and still is in many ways today. So he says, if I found favor in your eyes, my Lord, don't pass your servant by. So right away, the scriptures tell us who it is that's showing up, but does he recognize him? No. All right? Very well, they answered, do as you say. So Abraham hurried into the tent. Quick, he said, get 3 seahs of the finest flour, knead it, bake some bread. Had to be unleavened bread, right? Because there wasn't time to let it rise. And then he ran to the herd, selected a choice tender calf, and gave it to his servant who hurried to prepare it. They brought some curds and milk, and the calf that had been prepared, and set these before them. While they ate, they stood them under the tree. Where's your wife Sarah? They asked him. There in the tent, he said. Then one of them said, I'll surely, listen to this, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind them, and Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out, and my Lord, look at what she calls Abraham. Okay, that's this word again. My Lord is old. Will I now have this pleasure? Somebody want to pick up there? Verse 13.
Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh.
Keep going, just a
Okay, well,
couple more.
It's not stapled, I'm going to flip it over.
Yep.
But he said, yes, you did laugh. When the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way.
There we go. Okay, so here's the situation. Sarah says, will I really have a child? And the person, right now not described as angel of the Lord, says, is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at a appointed time. And again, he says, I'm going to make sure that you have a baby. Not something most angels would say. And now comes a further dialogue that continues what's been there. The Lord continues the dialogue. And again, it's one of these three appearing as a man. But says what? Somebody want to pick up there with verse 17?
Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham spoke up again, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes. What if the number of righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy it. Once again he spoke of him. What if only 40 are found there? He said, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, now that I have been so bold to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there? He said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home.
Now notice here what name is used. Right, capital L. And at this particular time, not only is that true, but he speaks in an interesting way. He says, shall I hide for him what I'm supposed to do?
It's almost like an aside.
Yeah. Now, why do we call this an angel of the Lord appearance? Because he doesn't call himself an angel of the Lord? Well, look, you don't have your Bibles. Chapter 19, verse 1. Right after the last verse here, it says this, the 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the... So, first they're called men at the beginning of chapter 18, then beginning of chapter 19 they're called angels. And again, when God appears in a physical manifestation in the Old Testament, it is often as this angel of the Lord appearing as a human being. Yeah.
So I was gonna ask though, why 3 of them? Is it supposed to be the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit?
Nope.
No?
The other 2 are just angels, they're just coming with
Just
them.
regular angels.
Right, regular angels.
His bodyguards.
Just hanging around with
Got a whole bunch
So
of-
only one of them gets called the Lord, only one of them talks like the Lord. So this is the context, is they're still waiting for that baby to come, right? And a miracle is going to happen. So this particular angel of the Lord announces the miracle that even though you're past menopause, you're going to have a baby, right? And then he's the one who's in dialogue with Abraham about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Abraham calls him, that's interesting, because Abraham calls, well, not the judge of all the earth. That's another good name.
Yep.
That's what, verse 25,
And it's also interesting, look at the word Lord that Abraham has on his lips.
capitalized.
It's capital, but it's small case. So he's still calling him Adonai. If you look at verse,
27,
32.
right, 30 is may the Lord, but notice there, the first letter is capital, but what you're looking at are the other letters, they're small. And again in verse 31, and again in verse 32. But every time the writer of the story, the narrator is writing, in this case we believe Moses is the one who gathered these things together, it's very clear that he's identifying this sir, somebody who looks like a man, but whose companions are also described as not only men but angels, that he is the Lord, speaking and dialoguing with Abraham at this particular stage. So you've got the only name for the angel of the Lord here is just he's called a man, right? His companions are called angels in 19 verse 1. He's identified with as both Yahweh and as Adonai. And what does he say? Well, the actions of the angel of the Lord, there's not really a lot of action here. There's nothing that he necessarily does. It's what he speaks, and he first of all promises that Sarah's going to have a baby yet. And secondly, he reveals to Abraham what's going to happen to Sodom and Gomorrah. And then has this dialogue back and forth.
How does that come up here all of a sudden? I
That's what I was
mean, we don't
wondering.
understand maybe the whole historical context. What was going on that God would just stop by and start talking about Sodom and
Yeah,
Gomorrah?
right, I don't get that either.
Well, that's because his nephew was.
His nephew, yeah. Because Lot, remember Lot and Abraham had come to the land together and they had separated ways. And if you remember the story, Abraham gave Lot his choice.
And he took the best.
And he took the best,
the most-
which apparently was also the worst.
And he hung out in Sodom, or he wouldn't have been there when
Yeah.
the angels showed up.
the first shall be last.
Well, and if you think about it, some of the places, I guess it's still true today, that some of the places where you can experience the greatest blessings also have the greatest curses. One of the reasons why people go to the cities is because cities are where people have an opportunity to flourish. You know, it's where you have things like zoos and art museums and, theaters and symphonies and all of those kind of things, a place where so much flourishes, but it's also, because of the density, places where crime flourishes. So it's not so where some of the most ungodly behavior happens, where drug addiction and homelessness and all of those things can be a part of the fabric of a city. So cities, while we can talk about all of the negatives about some of our cities, and that's what you're hearing in a lot of the commercials today, right?
Yes.
Because everybody's focused on crime, and whether to defund or not defund the police and all that kind of stuff, right? It's what you're not hearing anybody doing is bragging about the things the cities do have. And they do have a lot to offer, You think about things like fireworks displays for the 4th of July. You think about all the musical festivals that happen in the city of Milwaukee, Summerfest and all of the ethnic festivals and all of those kind of things. Little towns might have one ethnic fest, but to have the kind of experiences that we have around us, and that comes also from some of the wealth in the cities and not only physical wealth but the capital wealth. You think about where the hospitals are, the best treatment centers. When I was a pastor in Aurorville and Borth, I just was talking to somebody who told me they were from Neenah. And they said, well, gee, I spent a lot of time in Neenah. Why did I go to Neenah? Because that's where Theta Clark Regional Medical Center was. And the people from from the small town where I was serving. They could go to Berlin, the hospital, but you didn't want to stay there very long. You know, and they could handle some things. But they didn't have the skills and the ability to handle some of the big things. And one of the problems you had, I remember one nurse told me that this one particular doctor kind of thought he was God, and so he thought he could solve everything, and he was very hesitant to refer where he should have referred. You know, you know, when our son Matthew was in the hospital, he was a year old because he had septic arthritis. One of the problems they had is not so much that they couldn't do what he needed to have done, it was they didn't have people skilled in dealing with 1-year-old babies. You know, I remember one time they were going to do an IV cut down, and they were having trouble, and then they remembered that one of the doctor's daughters had just done a round at Children's in Milwaukee, and so they called her in, and she did it. And for her it was a piece of cake because she had done enough with babies, but for some of the other nurses there and doctors, the medical team, they weren't used to working with children that small or lines that small that had to be inserted into a baby. So, you know, there's a lot of benefit to being in and around big cities, but unfortunately there's also a lot of crime. You know? So yeah, he got a good world, but obviously a very decadent world, and so then you've got the challenge of what goes on with Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay. So then we move on to Genesis 21, where the angel comes up once again, this time once again dealing with Hagar and Ishmael. The context is that, well, let me just give you a little context from chapter 21. In verse 8 of chapter 21, it says, the child grew. This is Isaac. And it says, the child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Okay? So, from that first visit by the angel of the Lord, Hagar had gone back. But now, it says he was distressed. And so God said to Abraham, don't be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And I'll make the son of your maidservant into a nation also, because he's your offspring. And then in verse 14, just before our text, it says, early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water, gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. So that's the context. And that's where Genesis 21, 17 and 19 picks up. Somebody want to read those verses then for us?
God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink.
And it goes on, God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert, became an archer. While he was living in the desert, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. So that's the rest of the story. Now, just notice again, here he's not called the angel of the Lord, he's called the angel of God. So it's the which is the word Elohim. It's where the ELs at the end of names comes from, Ishmael. So the angel of God is comes to visit him. That's what he's called. The major characters are these three. It's Hagar, her son, Ishmael, and the angel of God. The names here, what is he called? Well, he's called angel of God. He's called God. Those are the primary names he's called here.
Is that, when you translate the Old Testament and you say the difference between Lord and God, those are both two different words then
Yes.
in translation?
Yes. So, and you see those names reflected elsewhere. And so the name for God is Elohim, which is interesting because it's a plural, but it's always translated when it's referring to this God as the single God. When it's referring to foreign gods, it's plural. This I am ending is, which, if you're thinking in a Trinity way, you say, well, already in the names of God, you've got plurality in a single, in one. You see this name reflected in names like Elijah, Jeremiah, Isaiah. Okay? All of those Yah names are the Lord something. Zedekiah is, I know that one, Zedek means the righteous one. And Zedekiah then is, the I is a my, so it's my righteous one is the Lord. Or the Lord is my righteous. My name, for instance, ends Daniel, ends in the EL, and any of the names that end in an EL generally are referring to God as well. My name means Dan, is a word for judge. The I means my. So literally my name means my judge is God. Or God is my judge.
Did your folks know that when they picked your name?
I don't know. But when you see the EL in the Hebrew name is referring to this name for God, and when you're seeing the Yah, it's reference to that name for the Lord. And so it's Ishmael, El, God, Ishmael hears, the God who hears. All right, so he's called God. He's called the angel of God. What does he do?
He gets her water,
He gets her water.
opens her eyes, she saw well.
He does a miracle. He gives the blind sight, in a certain sense, you could say. He brings her comfort in a very desperate situation. And one of the things you see the angel of the Lord doing is showing up at a critical time to often save someone's life or bring a blessing into someone's life. Here it's a little both. He saves her, but he also blesses her and says, you and your boy are going to be okay. And then the text, like I said in verse 20, it says, and God was with the boy as he grew up. Those are some powerful words. What he said he would do, he did. And we don't hear much more about Ishmael for a while, but here the angel, it's interesting, appears twice to intervene. And that's where we're going to quit today. Pick up in a couple of weeks. Pastor Poppy will do a Bible study next week. The next one is the sacrifice of Abraham and Isaac by Abraham.
So we're gonna do this with you.
Yeah.
Poppy will do something else.
Yeah. So we'll pick up with letter D, Genesis 22, 11 to 18. And if you want to work ahead, you can always read those and then put your own notes down about looking at the context. What's the context? Who are the major characters in this particular event? What is the angel of the Lord called? What does the angel of the Lord do? And what does the angel of the Lord say? That's what we're looking at, because each of those things reveals to us a little bit more of the character, fills in a little bit more fully the character of this angel of the Lord who shows up. Yeah, Karen.
Could you just say, I don't want to get
No,
done.
no, Karen.
Just one thing about, I think you said it on Thursday, but I can't remember how you described it. Why does the Lord appear as an angel of the Lord, and why does he not say, hi, I'm God, I'm here? Why is he doing this whole thing?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I have a complete answer, but my a little bit of an answer would be this, that part of it is, it has to do with the word angel, because when you and I use the word angel, we think about, that. When the word angel, angelos is the Greek, Mashiach is the Hebrew, Malach is the Hebrew, Malach. So Malachi means my messenger, because a malach is a messenger, and the word angel in Hebrew is malach, because the primary purpose of the angel was to bring a message. Okay. The other truth in the Bible is it's reiterated a number of times. You can't see the face of God and live, and so He's got to come into your presence in a way that you can receive Him without dying. So He appears as an angel, but don't always think that it meant He had wings or anything like that. Because the primary purpose of the angel was to communicate God's message.
But why did he need a messenger to do that if he was God?
Well, what we would understand by that is He's teaching us something about the Trinity in the Old Testament. Because He speaks to the Lord, but He's also the Lord. And that's where, in the introductory video from the Bible Project, you scratch your head and say, now wait a minute. How can you both be the Lord and then speak to the Lord? And the point is that in the Old Testament, this is a way to show there's a plurality in the Godhead.
And it says that in the beginning of creation, it says, let us
make man in our image. Yeah, so it uses a plural pronoun for some singular verbs there. Or in the beginning was, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and over the creation, what hovered?
Spirit.
And the hover is a bird word, so to make us think of things like doves, right? They didn't have airplanes back then. So there's the Spirit. And what comes next? And God said.
That's the word.
Now you connect that with John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now how can He be with God and be God at the same time? And so it's that unpacking the mystery of the Trinity and describing it in a way that starts already in the Old Testament, lay the groundwork for this idea that God has multiple personalities in the single Godhead. But not being three gods, which is, of course, the mystery of the Trinity. But that's why you have this angel of the Lord as a separate character who talks like the Lord, who does things as the Lord, but he also speaks to the Lord. And he speaks on behalf of the Lord. Well, how can you both speak on behalf of the Lord and be the Lord at the same time? Unless your distinct personalities within the Godhead. Okay, so let's close with a word of prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you that you sent to us in your Son Jesus, the angel of your presence, to put on flesh and blood and walk among us in a way that he could be seen and touched and heard, and in a way that he could live the life we can't live, a perfect life under your law, and die the death we can't die, an innocent death under your law, so that we could have the sure and certain hope of the forgiveness of sins and a resurrection like his to eternal life. We ask, Lord, that you would continue to bless us as we grow deeper and richer in our understanding of the way you reveal yourself to us, so that we can be blessed as we make our journey through this life home to your presence. We ask it in your Son's name. Amen. Well, that's kind of fun, isn't it? I really like this Bible study. It's been a long time since I've done it, so
That's interesting.
thanks.